Now we're getting a flat reaction to the budget in terms of responses from our panelists. The Prime Minister is giving a television interview on Doordarshan right now. Quickly, let's cut into that for a brief bit, and then we'll come back.
Panchayati Raj, has there been much success in that? I think it's been a little disappointing.
Well, I think the picture is a mixed picture. I think so in some areas, Panchayati Raj institutions are doing excellent jobs. In others, I think the picture is not that rosy. I think we have a long way to go to strengthen the administrative, technical and managerial capabilities of these new entities.
As far as agriculture is concerned, why is it that despite spending so much money in agriculture and on agriculture investment, the government has increased its spending? Why is it that agricultural growth rate doesn't seem to be picking up?
Well, I think that's not correct. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, agriculture has picked up, though it is not, I think, visible in large numbers. But in terms of investment ratio in agriculture, it is up. We will raise it further in this 5-year plan to 16% of agricultural GDP. Also, in terms of food production, there has been a record output of food grain, both in terms of rice and wheat. So it is not true that agriculture production is not increasing, but you have a new situation. If the per capita income of the country is rising at the rate of 7.2% per annum, and whatever reasonable income elasticity of demand for food grains, the demand for food is rising at a much faster pace. So we have to, I think, accelerate the processes of production at a much faster pace than ever before if the supply-demand gap is to be bridged.
But the growth rate still sorely lags that in manufacturing as well as services. It's just 2.6 last year, so that is rather disappointing. I think
well, I think the agricultural growth rate needs to be, I think, increased, and the Finance Minister has outlined large number of measures, particularly focusing on the needs of expanding the area under irrigation. He has announced a new mechanism to finance irrigation. He has announced new mechanism to deal with the problems of dryland agriculture. We are going to set up agriculture.
Okay, that's the Prime Minister. Basically, it's a re-enunciation of what the government has done. Adi Godrej is with us live from Mumbai. Mr. Godrej, your first reactions to this rather populist, straightforward election budget?
I think it's a very good budget in many ways. The expenditure on the social and educational sectors and on agricultural and rural sectors, I think, will put a lot of consumable income in the hands of the rural population. I think two excellent proposals are the reduction in the SENVAT rate from 16% to 14%. I think that will bring down the cost of goods to the consumer. It will contain inflation and will create an economic stimulus. I think this is a very, very good measure, and I think it will aid growth considerably. And I feel with the buoyancy in revenues will not come down. Revenues will, in fact, to my mind, rise despite the lower SENVAT rate. And a third proposal, which I think is excellent, is that dividend distribution tax on the dividends a company gets from its subsidiaries will now be set off against the dividend distribution tax it pays on the dividend it pays out. So the double taxation on dividend distribution will now be avoided. So I feel it's a very good budget, and I think it will provide the economic stimulus we will need in a year when the global growth rate is slowing down.
Mr. Godrej, do stay with us. Going to go live to the Economic Times right now, where T.K. Arun is there with his analysis of this budget. How are you looking at it? How is the Economic Times looking at it? We got Swami's perspective. Pretty flat and a bit stunned, Swami is, by what has been presented. How do you look at it, T.K.?
Exactly. I would endorse the sentiments completely. The reality is that structural change in the economy has proceeded to an extent where further change depends not so much on what the center does as what the states do. So at best, the center can give them signals, give them incentives, they can exhort, and that's about it. There is nothing much that the center can do in terms of structural change, it would seem to me. In this budget, if you look at it, he has increased the outlays for agriculture. He has increased the outlays for irrigation. But ultimately, whether this will translate into actual increase in production, productivity on the ground, depends on what the states do. And this we are not sure at all that the center will be able to ensure or that many states will be able to ensure. So is that money going waste? It probably is. As for farm loan waiver, which is the biggest, most populist gesture in this budget, it is perhaps not so surprising. In our history since British times, farm loans have been waived every 20 years or so. Apparently the Prime Minister has been indicating this, and
right.
It has finally happened.
Right. Well, that is indeed the case. TK, thanks for your perspective. I must say the Economic Times response to the budget seems to be pretty flat so far. We have Mr. Adi Godrej with us yet, but Mr. Godrej very happy with the SEMVAT rate. You want to make a point there, following up what Mr. Godrej just said here, Omkar?
I tend to agree with Adi. I mean, being overwhelmed is not a flat sentiment, right? You've been editorializing and calling it flat.
Yes.
I want to make this very clear that one is overwhelmed because he has given a huge growth, huge growth in expenditure. He's also done massive growth in expenditure, a large loan waiver. We need to know where that money is coming from. Yeah. He has done a great thing by reducing the SEMVAT rates. Yeah. He has done a great thing by getting rid of the double taxation of dividends.
Yes.
So somewhere down the line, what he is assuming, and his numbers say he's going to meet his budget targets next year, he's still assuming a great deal of buoyancy of revenue growth. And let's hope for his sake, also given that next year the 6th Pay Commission will come into play, let's hope for his sake and the country's sake, we will get that buoyancy. Subject to that, it's not flat. It's not a flat reaction.
No, I'm glad I editorialized and got you to respond, riled you up. I've been riling people up since morning. But just following the point Mr. Godrej, who's still with us, said, Swami, you would like to make a follow-up point to that?
There's a separate issue.
Yeah.
A large number of tax breaks are due to expire.
Right.
One for software parks, and the other for area-based exemption.
That's right.
He has said nothing about that.
Actually, that's...
without saying anything.
Yeah, that's true.
A huge amount of revenue is coming in.
Okay.
So by
no, I mean, that's a...
By being very... You know, I said, he's a clever finance minister.